My name is Emma Cusdin. I'm a director at Global Butterflies, and we are a trans and non-binary inclusion consultancy looking at the workplaces only. We've got amazing panelists lined up today. We are live on Facebook. If you've got a question as you go through today, please do pop it in the Q&A section of the Zoom, and then we will put that through to the panelists. We've only got an hour. We've got some questions we'd love to talk to the panelists about, but we also really want to hear from you. So over to the panelists. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself briefly, and then we'll get stuck right in. So Emily, over to you first.
I'm Emily Hamilton. I'm Vice President of Strategic Change at RS Components in the UK.
Thank you. Preston.
Hello, I'm Head of Content Enrichment at RS Components, so I work alongside Emily. Also the Chairman of our Spectrum LGBTQ plus community within the business as well.
Great, thank you. Brandon.
Hi, I'm Brandon Baranowski. I work for Willis Towers Watson here in the US. I'm located in Buffalo, New York, and I work within our data services contingent for BDA, and I'm also a co-leader as part of our national LGBTQ group as well.
Great, thank you, Brandon. And hopefully Raven Gill from Butterfly Barbados may be joining us as well as a panelist. So we're looking forward to Raven joining us. So this year has been pretty much a very tumultuous year. Lots has happened this year. So first question to panelists, who are you looking to right now for sort of guidance? Who's giving you, let's look at the positivity, who's giving you energy and joy in this challenging year?
I'll jump in. I guess energy and joy for me is coming from work colleagues. This is actually my first year being out, so I'm the baby trans, I guess, on the panel. And yeah, it has been a really tough year, but coming out and presenting authentically at work has made me find a lot of allies, a lot of people who are there to support me, and yeah, that's been a bright spot in an otherwise relatively dark year.
Great.
I think I'll follow up with the same thing, really. Everybody's kind of pulled together in their own communities and businesses, work colleagues, the community itself within the business. We've made sure that we're really keeping in touch with each other, checking on each other, and just offering support and guidance where needed. And then sort of externally, when we look at global events and things that are happening that affect the trans community recently, for me, I think somebody that's given me a lot of joy is Munro Bergdorf. Been very, very vocal on Twitter. A great activist, first transgender model for L'Oreal. She's been tackling some real big issues around the world at the moment, and I really enjoy reading what she has to say, because she speaks for the few of us.
Thank you, Preston. I'm sure we'll pick up on some of those themes that you mentioned as we go through our time together. Brandon.
For me, I will also kind of jump on the bandwagon with Emily and Preston, my work colleagues, mostly because they're the folks I see most of the day other than my wife. Though I have had the benefit of a couple of my different social groups have been able to move predominantly onto online interaction. So that's been nice to be able to touch base with them, whether it be once a week, every couple of weeks, whatever. Past that, I've mostly been doing a lot of podcast listening and listening to a lot of pop music. So I kind of bounce around right now.
And for me, I think that's a really good theme that possibly we can pick up in the Q&A, which is our own mental health and resilience during this period when we've been all on Zoom meetings and we've all been on different online meetings just to keep ourselves resilient. And given it's Transgender Awareness Week, I'm really interested in terms of things that you have come across, whether it's art, literature, poetry or film, that's really helped you. Hello, Raven. Nice to see you.
So sorry to be late.
That's all right. Would you just like to introduce yourself, Raven?
Hi, I'm sorry for who I just cut off. I'm Raven Gill. I am the founder and director of Butterfly Trans Barbados. That is a trans-led and trans-focused organization in Barbados, that's in the Caribbean. And my main focus is everything trans, so gender identity recognition, fighting for access to comprehensive health care, lobbying for legislation to have protective laws of trans and gender diverse persons. So yes, I'll put myself on mute now.
Great, welcome, thank you, thank you. So our question was really around things that helped you understand you, whether it's art, literature, or poetry. You know, what are some of those things that have helped you in your own journey?
Me?
Preston, do you want to go?
I think for me, it was probably a film when I was first kind of coming to terms with who I was and how I felt. And that's the film Boys Don't Cry. And I know recently there was a really amazing documentary on Netflix that kind of talked about our representation when it comes to movies and films. And kind of looking back on that film now, there are some problems. It was problematic. But seeing somebody like me who felt the same way that I did, there's a comfort in that. And, you know, nobody wants to feel alone in their journey. So it was a real turning point for me. It was, you know, this is okay. There are other people that feel the way you do. And I've always related to that film, and the music to it is amazing too. So, you know, it's kind of been a theme to my life, really. So whenever I'm, you know, struggling or finding things difficult, I'll put some music on from the film.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, I mean, Preston referenced it there. So the Netflix disclosure documentary this year, and that was pretty hard hitting, but it was helpful to see, you know, to Preston's point, other people like me, and seeing them representing themselves and speaking for themselves. Because I think my experience, certainly before coming out, was overwhelmingly negative in terms of trans representation in media. But saying that, I also discovered Sense8 a bit late to the party and binge watched Sense8 twice over the space of a couple of weeks. And again, the character of Nomi in that really resonated. It was nice to see someone like me, but for whom their trans identity wasn't the defining factor about them. They were trans, but they were a strong character in and of themselves. And for me, that was really powerful.
Brandon, what are your thoughts?
I can't say I can necessarily pinpoint a single work that, or even a small group of works that have necessarily helped me find myself. I feel like my coming out story feels very backwards compared to a lot of people. So I didn't really get into a lot of maybe necessarily recognizing trans characters or recognizing that type of representation until after I had already come out, and that can be a story for another time when we have much more time. Since then, I've definitely been trying to get involved in taking in a lot more trans-specific media. I mean, I kind of always have taken in queer or LGBTQ media, and I definitely, Disclosure, that Emily mentioned was a very great viewing. There's some great fiction works by a couple different authors that have trans characters that have ended up kind of speaking to me in terms of experience. Unfortunately, like I said, off the top of my head, I can't pinpoint any one or two to mention here.
Okay, great. And Raven, what about yourself? What about any particular works of art or books or films that have influenced you? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I am a bit of an anime geek. I'm in love with Sailor Moon, and I have a little something here. I also have a very big poster. So for me growing up, seeing Sailor Moon, I didn't particularly connect everything until later in life, but Sailor Moon had characters, girls that transformed into men that transformed into women. They had the original one, the Japanese version, they had the the lesbian couple. So Sailor Moon kind of was pivotal for my transition journey. Like just having the love for that anime in particular to this day. Outside of that, I don't particularly have any other noteworthy things that would have sparked my transition other than family, because I live at home still, and my grandmother is from another Caribbean country, St. Lucia, and they've known to be not very progressive with LGBT things. But she's the person who encouraged me to transition. She was like, okay, so I'm seeing that this is not how you're typically supposed to grow, but if you want to do this, do it. So at a certain age, I stopped buying anything male, and I just blossomed into the beautiful creature that I am today.
Fabulous, and thank you for everybody for sharing something. That's been brilliant. I want to really move on now to in the workplace, and a big theme over the summertime has been about intersectionality. We had the horrific death of George Floyd in the US. We've had a lot of conversation around anti-racism and how we can build that in. And the experience of Black, trans, and non-binary people can be very different to those with white privilege. I'd really love to hear some thoughts about that. What should we consider when we come to think about the workplace, when we think about making it more safe for our Black, trans, and non-binary friends? And I'm going to ask Brandon to go first, if you don't mind, because I know you've got a big interest in this area.
I do, partially because being in the US, there was an even greater impact with everything that has happened this summer and continues to happen. In terms of trying to make workplaces safer for Black, trans, and non-binary folks, I feel like a lot of that is recognizing the way that you can be an ally both ways, because there can be, there's very much a colorism or racism inherent in some LGBTQ circles and communities. And just like there is very much anti-LGBTQ feelings within some Black communities. And so to recognize that to be both Black and trans is kind of they're dealing with it from multiple sides. So it's, in terms of making a workspace safer, I feel like what we do for one needs to be done for the other. And a lot of it comes down to making sure we're lifting everybody up when we're making things more available for everyone. Here we're still, at least at thankfully, WTW was already fairly far along with that, but we have we're making sure to make our Black colleagues and people of color colleagues have more spaces for themselves, and find ways to make sure we're lifting them up and making sure they have the access to the opportunities that are out there, because our higher levels tend to still be very white-centric and also, honestly, very male-centric. And that's one of those things that's being worked on. And that's true across the country, too, to be honest. There's very much a lot of that issue. And at least in the US, there's so much that's systemically cultural that needs to change. The workplace is a great place to start. It's got to start somewhere.
Great. Thank you. And I'd love to hear, more importantly, from Raven, what's the experience in Barbados?
Right. So in Barbados, trans people they don't have access to jobs, and racism is here, but that's not the biggest challenge that we face. Although, so the white people here are minorities, mainly Caribbean, African descent, those kind of things, but still, you find that minority still has way more access to jobs, to a better education, to everything else. So specifically for the trans community, there was just a bill passed, the employment bill, and it covered the L, the G, and the B. It specifically removed the T when there was community buy-in. There was meeting the stakeholders, and we did consultations. And at the end, they still took out gender identity. So they still said they don't know what trans is, they don't really understand, and they said, oh, well, we gave you sexual orientation, so that should cover you, so take it or nothing. So right now, we're still currently fighting to have the amendment before it is concrete, and then we have to wait another 8 to 10 years because the bill had started in 2012, and it only recently got passed a few months ago. So trans people still are at a huge disadvantage. They can't get jobs normally. If I, for instance, were to go to apply for a job, I would have to show my ID, and I've had my name changed legally, but the gender marker is still the same, so I wouldn't be able to get a job. And if they do hire me, they're going to force me to come in male attire. So I'm not going to be comfortable going as a trans woman in a big overall. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because it, just hearing you talk is making me really angry that we have places in the world where trans and non-binary people are hugely disadvantaged, and sometimes that sort of testimony for me is so powerful that we sometimes forget that. So thank you so much for sharing that so openly, and I'm sure that there'll be some great questions coming off the back of the sort of trans map of the world. I want to move us on to talk about a conversation that sometimes we hear far too often in the trans and non-binary space, which is about, dare I use the words, bathrooms, access to bathrooms, access to changing facilities. Especially here in the UK, the conversation seems to focus around toilets and bathrooms and changing rooms, and more specifically around trans women, dare I say.
I think we might have lost Emma.
I think Emma has frozen. So just hoping that she can rejoin us. I think, she was making the point that there seems to be a lot of focus, especially here in the UK, around bathrooms and in particular trans women and access to bathrooms. And so I'm just picking up kind of where she would go and what are perhaps some of your thoughts on this. And Emily, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the UK, I hate to call it discourse because it doesn't tend to reach those heights, but it's been pretty grim. I mean, where to start? There's a whole load of activity in the UK, both, I guess, on social media and beyond, which paints a picture of what goes on in a women's toilet in a way that I've never experienced, and nor has any other woman, cisgender or transgender. My feeling is you go to a toilet, you go for a wee, maybe something else, you check your lipstick, you wash your hands, and you leave. And there is a lot of suggestion that people like me transition solely to gain access to these spaces for nefarious purposes, that we're in there to take photographs or to assault people. And that really ramped up over the summer. This last summer, I picked a great time to come out, get a pandemic and a whole load of transphobia at the same time. So dare I mention the initials of doom. So when JKR did her lengthy screed about trans people, it got to the stage where I never had any fear of using women's toilets until really this summer. And then it got to a stage, and I'm going to be really open on this call, got to a stage where I was driving to friends for a visit during the summer. and I needed to go for a wee, and I was too frightened to go into service station toilets because of the whipping up of a frenzy, and I ended up having an accident in my car. Not a car accident, but a toilet accident, and so that was very dehumanising, very embarrassing, and that is solely because of the frenzy and the agenda that seems to have been whipped up around bathroom access. And I guess if there are people who dialed in because they're interested in these things, I promise you, we're only going there to have a wee, wash our hands, maybe check our makeup. And the worst thing is, no one can point to any evidence of people misusing gendered toilets to commit these heinous crimes that they may suggest that they go on there. There is no evidence of that, not in this country, nor in our neighbouring countries who have utilised self-identification for trans people. So in the Republic of Ireland, for example, where it is gender self-identification, there was no uptick in these awful things that people are saying go on in bathrooms. So I just wish we'd stop talking about it. We trans people have to pee as well.
Absolutely, and sorry I disappeared. I'm now back. So thank you, Emily, for that. Preston, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with Emily. It has become too much of an issue when it is a non-issue. We all have a gender-neutral toilet in our home. So, for this to become a public debate and to have got to the place it has is scary, and, scary for everybody within the trans community. But I think they focus on misinformation and the one issue where, if we were to implement stuff within the UK where we had bathroom rules, I'm pretty sure a lady wouldn't enjoy sharing the toilet with me, because it's the same issue there. And what we need to do is focus on the real issue, which is education. It's the future, the next generation. My children are being brought up to be young gentlemen that understand the issues in the world, that understands the inequalities we see around us, and how they can make a difference and how they can change that debate, essentially. So yeah, as Emily mentioned before, it is heavily a trans women discussion, which, the bigger picture is really not being thought about. I think I mentioned last week we had a discussion over it, and somebody was talking about some recent NHS discussions as well with hospital wards, and they'd said that they were worried their grandma with dementia wouldn't understand if a trans woman was on the same ward as her. Trans women are women. They, how confusing is it for me to be sharing that ward with the grandma? Look across the ward and see me with full beard and no hair. It's just a ridiculous argument, and unfortunately, it's damaging. It's really, really damaging to the community and people's safety. I think it is important to look out for safety for women, but that includes trans women. That as I mentioned, it's about education and the future generation. That's where we need to be focusing.
So moving away from this, because I think you raised a really good point there, Preston, about education, I'd like us to move on to about allyship. And there's a couple of questions that have come up in the chat regarding resources. And what I'd ask each panelist, if you do have any time, is just put your favourite resources into the chat for people to pull on, so that they can actually think about books or things that they can take. But I want to move on to allyship now. What does it mean to you, that word allyship? We talk about allies in the workplace. What does it mean, and what's been the impact on you of great allies? So maybe start with either Brandon. Do you want to go first, and then I'll come to Raven about people who've really helped and supported you?
Absolutely. So for me, the term ally and allyship is very much a verb, not a noun. It's about, it ties into intersectionality, in that the idea is to be there to support your fellow person and use whatever resources, privileges, what you have at your disposal that they potentially don't, to help lift them up, and get them, closer to, move the goal closer to equality, or at least equity. So some of the allies we have, or at least that I've had experience with, have run the gamut from, they're often my coworkers that can be there just to be supportive, whether it be coming to activities we're putting on, or donating to charities where we're hosting fundraisers for. It could be just finding a different path to engage communication with leadership, stuff like that. And then obviously outside of the workplace, it's, going to rallies, it's writing to legislators, it's just being there to listen when something kind of sucks and you need to talk about it. So to me, being an ally really comes down to being a good friend. I mean, it's not somebody you necessarily are close with in terms of your likes or anything like that, but they're a fellow good human being. They want to see you do well, and want to help you do well. So it's being an ally to me is very much finding ways to help out your fellow man or woman or person.
And I love that, being a good human being.
Mm-hmm.
So Raven, what sort of allies have helped and supported you?
So the allies that I mainly find or come to the aid of trans persons in the Caribbean and Barbados specifically have been some of the feminist activists. There's a instance where we were at a regional convening, and the three thematic areas were legislation, mental health, and abortion rights. And I was a part of the mental health team, and one of the activists in mind, she overlapped mental health and abortion. And there was this one person that was a part of the group. She's supposed to be a feminist, but from the time that they spoke anything of trans in the feminist movement, she denounced it. She didn't want any part of it, even though she sat and had several personal one-on-one conversations with me, and she said she understands and this and that. From the time it was her time to speak in front of the entire group, she was anti-trans. And this one person, they cut her midway and said, you can't be a feminist if you're still not inclusive of trans women. So outside of the feminists that I am really appreciative for, because even when there are things that don't particularly have to do with trans, she always pushes for me to be a part of the conversation, or to be a part of the movement, to be a part of that journey, just so that I can bring visibility there where it is not. And I find that allyship can be a bit, so there's what's the word, performative allyship that we've seen quite a bit since the deaths of the trans women globally, since the murder of those Black men, George Floyd and the others in America. The performative allyship, they've seen us crying out and being angry, stating the things that affect us, and okay, so how can we help? What do you want us to do? Tell us. And a simple Google search. It's a simple common sense thing. Donate your time. If you're going to donate your money, don't just give your money. Follow up with how can we be visible with you and strengthen the fight, strengthen the movement. So allyship can be a bit disingenuous when you think there are persons that are just jumping on the bandwagon, yay, and you have to call them out on their bullshit so that it can be completely comprehensive and encompass everybody. Because there are disabled trans persons, there are passable trans persons, there are some that are fine being blurring the lines or not fitting in the binaries of trans. And you have to be an ally that welcomes and encourages all diversities of being transgender.
And I think that's really powerful, being an ally for all elements of transgender and non-binary, not the ones that you want to pick and choose. I know, Preston, you're very strong on allyship. So tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, so within RS Components, when we first started the community, we didn't want it to just be a place for the community. We wanted it to be a place where people could come to learn and to educate themselves. So we called it Spectrum and Allies. And I think I kind of echo what everybody said on the call, really. We did a session on the different types of allyship and what you could do to be a super ally. So, a lot of people shy away from conversations or things they don't know about because they're afraid of saying something offensive or something that would upset somebody. Well, being an ally is actually taking time out to go and do the research rather than shying away, educating and kind of teaching yourself about that subject so that you can have discussions and you can call things out when you see them. And so for us, it was really, really important to create not only a safe space for people within the community, but a safe space for people to become allies or to learn how to become a better ally. And, we often say that our voices aren't heard. And it's not because we're not shouting loudly enough. It's that, we're being overlooked a lot, especially within the UK and the recent discussions we've just talked about. And so that's where allyship's really, really key, to kind of bridge that gap. And it's not a gap of our own doing. It's not something we've put in place, but it's the governments and the other people on the other end of the spectrum in those discussions. Allies really help bridge that gap and come from a place where they can bring those two worlds together, so to speak. So yeah, I'm massively passionate about creating allies and helping people to be better allies.
And hopefully some people listening today can then take those first steps in their allyship by just attending and then sharing what you're taking away. So I think there's some small steps. We've got an amazing panel today. We've got Emily and Preston in the UK, we've got Brandon in the US, and we've got Raven in Barbados. And I could speak to you for hours about the different experiences in your different jurisdictions. As people know, global trans is my geek fest, so I'll try and pull back from that a little bit. But Raven, I'd love to hear the experience of trans and non-binary people in Barbados. You've touched on it already, but we'd love to hear some more. And what are the things that you're focused on?
So in Barbados, the trans community is mainly trans women. There are a few trans men that I know. However, because of for lack of better words, ignorance of the non-LGBT community, trans men that present masculine, even if they still have their breasts, they may be strapping them down or whatever, they're pitched to the public, or the public labels them as lesbians, butch lesbians, devalidating their trans identity. And sometimes it is even harder for trans men to explain that they are trans men. For trans women, we have a few. I grew up knowing a trans woman who performed, and she still performs to this day. And she's been a notable figure for our carnival. However, the stigma attached to her is that she's a drag queen because she does drag performances. They don't understand that it's just a job that she does. She's a trans woman performing at a drag show. The education is not there. And that is one of the main things that I'm focused on, education. And I think her name is Alicia that I just saw in the chat. She's saying that there's a space needed for allies to be a safe space needed for so that they can learn from us. But again, there are questions that by now you should know not to ask trans persons. Don't ask about our genitals. Don't ask about surgeries. Don't ask about things that you wouldn't want somebody to ask you as a not a cisgender person. Non-binary is even worse. When you tell someone that you're non-binary, it's like, oh, what is that? This is like, oh, you got all these titles, all these letters, and they don't take the time to understand. For a better example, the Rastafarian community here, they fought for their rights to smoke all the plants and the herbs and the bush and whatever they want. They've had to educate people on the differences between medical and man-made and whatever, and the reasons why this is better than that. It's the same thing for trans persons here. However, we are always, always, always discarded. Oh, that's too much. We don't care. Do whatever you feel like. But when we do what we need to, it's struck down by the church or policymakers, legislators. So it's really, really tough, especially when the community of trans is small. The non-binary community is even smaller. If you pair them together, it's still at a disadvantage compared to the L, the G, and the B, who navigates the lines of. So for trans women in particular, finding a job is almost impossible. Getting higher education is almost impossible. And then when like funders come to the Caribbean and they want us to do these things and give them the reports and the numbers, we can't give them because some of the trans people don't have the capacity past secondary school, or what you would probably call high school. They don't have enough skills to go and say, well, let's develop a campaign. Even if we don't have funding, we can still be visible and use cell phones, when they're protesting against the church, just in the background lobbying so that you get the visibility, the presence. There's so much despair within the community that sometimes the community themselves have given up. Even though there are organizations that are actively championing for them, they're like, oh, whatever. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, oh, well, we didn't think it was going to happen the way. And these are the things that I'm fighting for, to try to get them to understand. You can't just give up. If you give up, you won't get anything. Better example, if the slaves gave up, we would still be in slavery. So the mentality that's the mentality that I have driving me to get things for the trans community. Because not even only for myself or my assistant, they identify as non-binary. And they have a beard and present masculine for purposes living in safe comfort at home or navigating trying to find a job. For me, I live at home. I've had a boyfriend for 3 years. He's visible with me. My family, we still have, I'm privileged to a certain extent where I know that's not the narrative for most trans persons who've been kicked out, sexually assaulted. I've not had that experience as a trans woman in the Caribbean, but I know it exists. So me on the front line fighting for the other persons who don't have the access, who don't have the voice, who don't have the strength to be visible, I'm doing that for them.
So, and thank you for sharing that insight. I love that. My takeaway is never give up. Always keep on fighting, keep on pushing, and being resilient. I'd like to move to Brandon now, to the US. Obviously, lots happened in the US regarding, dare I say, the presidential elections. And I'd love to hear, your thoughts on the trans and non-binary experience in the US.
So it's complicated is the shortest answer I can make. A lot of things here are complicated for a variety of reasons, often by creation or intention. I will say from a presidential election standpoint, there was a little bit of a lift and some relief, which was really nice. Especially because the same time 4 years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night crying because and things have been really bad for the past 4 years. All of that to be said, that one of the issues within the US is because so many of our legislation is state-based, it's very, very different, even 10 miles between people, depending on which side of the state border you lived on. I have the privilege of living in New York State, which is one of the much more trans and just generally LGBTQ friendly states. But I also had to move here to get those rights. Other places I've lived have been far less accepting, far less accessible, far less just generally welcoming. And there are certainly parts of the state that can be nerve-wracking to go to. A couple of years ago, one of the states actually instituted a trans bathroom bill. Thankfully, it was quickly rescinded, but the only reason it was because so many organizations pulled their money out of that state, and that state lost close to, it's like over $400 million in revenue for a year. And there are still states I, as a fairly passing and fairly privileged white trans man, I'm not comfortable going to because of the culture in certain parts of this country that are just not welcoming or just don't feel safe. Hopefully a lot of that will get better with the most recent election decisions, but it's not a magic potion or anything. Biden is certainly, yes, he's a Democrat and he's blue, but he's also a very modern, moderate candidate. And that is, again, a whole different conversation to have. But at least there are a lot of executive orders that have been devoted to being rescinded or overturned. We have bigger issues right now with our current Supreme Court makeup. And unfortunately, because of the way timings and various things happened, it's still very precarious there. So there are bright spots, but it's certainly not. It hasn't magically changed. Unfortunately, So it's one of those things we need to continue fighting for our own access and our own rights to things, and just continue that education. As Preston said, a lot of it is just not just a lack of information, but a very deliberate spread of misinformation or bad information and propaganda. A lot of it's propaganda. So, and I know a lot of it is similar to what you all experience in the UK. So I would say we're somewhere between the UK and Barbados in all honesty, because it's certainly not as bad as Britain has unfortunately experienced. But we only recently, just this year, had a ruling that individuals can't be fired from their job for being trans. There are still several states where you can lose your housing. You have very poor healthcare access. You have very poor adoption rights. It's a mess. Not gonna lie, it's a mess.
Which probably thank you, Brandon, and probably takes us nicely on to the UK. It's been quite for me personally, quite a challenging time over the summer. I'd love to hear both Emily and Preston's view of where we are in the UK.
It's worsening. I think that's the first thing to say. It's definitely getting worse. There's definitely been a sustained campaign of transphobia and transphobic discourse over the summer. I mentioned it before, that some of that's fueled by prominent personalities, certain children's authors getting involved in the debate. We obviously went through the process of the Gender Recognition Act reform, which was there to make our lives easier. overwhelming support for making our lives easier and cheaper and less dehumanized, and that was ignored actively by the government. They threw some bitter crumbs to us. They've reopened, or the select committee has reopened an inquiry now. So the pain never ends. They've asked the questions, they've had an answer, they didn't like the answer. From a personal perspective, there's definitely a sense that our current government, and particularly the Women and Equalities Minister, have taken a lead from America and from certainly some of the more right-wing, maybe religiously motivated groups within America. And that has also led to a rise in groups largely on social media, but elsewhere, who actively agitate against trans people and our right to take part in public life. I did answer a question in chat. I think, we have to live our lives. We have to demonstrate we are none of the things that people say we are. But I foresee a long, hard, tiring, ugly fight just to be recognised as the human beings we are.
Yeah, just following on from that, completely agree. And I think the current government announced some changes, parceled it up in a nice little package, and everybody was like, oh, that's brilliant for you guys. But when you actually looked into it deeper, there was no real change. And in fact, it's still as difficult as ever. We have huge long waiting lists when it comes to healthcare. It becomes a vicious circle. There are certain things you need to be able to legally become yourself, but you can't get those until you've had the healthcare that you need. So it's just spiraling. And as Emily said, there is a long, hard fight before us. And I think when people in public kind of view, who are respected by a lot of people within the UK, start saying that are inaccurate or incorrect, that are, against the trans community, it gives people that platform to join in and, continue. So I answered a question too, and I said we need allies more than ever now. Our voices are not being listened to. We need the support and help from everybody within the community, everybody outside of the community, because it's going to be difficult.
And I think that sort of leads me on when we're talking about communities. I often get asked the question around the LGBTQI community, and should trans and non-binary be part of that community? Should it be separate? I'd love to hear the panelists' thoughts around, when people say we should be forming a separate movement. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely.
Emily, I can see you shaking your head.
Absolutely not. I mean, one of my LGBTQ plus heroes is Lord Michael Cashman in the UK. He's been a campaigner for the rights of LGBTQ plus people for decades, and his motto is "Together, only together." LGBTQ people have fought together for our human rights, and this is the point. These are human rights, not special rights, not additional rights, human rights, for decades. And there has been a move, and it's certainly been very prominent in the UK, and it's attempting to spread, to separate the T from the LGB. And that, firstly, that's ridiculous because of intersectionality. Many of us are one or more letters in that setup. So how the hell do we separate ourselves? But also, I fear that splitting the LGBTQ plus community apart from itself is the thin end of a wedge. Once trans people's rights have been kicked into the long grass, it won't stop there. Then the rights of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people will become full. Once those people's rights are gone, what happens next? Is it women's rights? And we see that as a creeping element of, and again, I call it discourse in the looser sense. Once you've taken away the rights of groups of people, it gets very addictive to keep taking those rights away. So in my view, we have to stay together. It hurts the most when I receive transphobia from members of the community. That is the most hurtful thing, because apart from the fact that it's ridiculous, I want to shake them and say, who's next? Once we're gone, you know who's next. So no, I was very emphatic about that. We have to stick together.
Thank you, Emily. And I can see Brandon sort of nodding in agreement. So what are your thoughts, Brandon?
Yeah, I fully agree with Emily. While our transphobic within the community issue is not nearly as prevalent as it is in the UK, it's certainly there, and obviously from the outside as well. And so I fully agree that we need to all stick together. I don't really know what it would accomplish otherwise. Like all I can say is yes, I fully agree with Emily. I feel like she said it much better than I can get out right now.
And Raven, in Barbados, is there that discussion around the sort of the trans and non-binary community being separate from the LGBT community? Because I'm very conscious that that might be a very sort of UK, North American conversation.
Not particularly, because I know a few trans women that say that we should not be a part of the community because they identify as heterosexual, or they just don't really feel that the rest of the LGB is for us. And again, you know that there is in inter-community squabbles, the fighting, for instance, gay men, feminine gay men don't like trans women. This is the experience of myself. It experiences myself, because passing as a binary binary woman, I can get men that they can't get. That's their mentality. Is like, oh, she's tricking the men. She's getting the men, the straight men that they can't get. And what they do is they out us to the men, these cisgender men that may not know that we're trans. And even if they know that we're trans, they're attracted to trans women. They go as far as like, why do you want her? I'm the same thing. It's just that she has a bit extra foolishness. I agree that we should not be apart from the community. We are already struggling and suffering. Where would we go to be separate to struggle and suffer even more? Because we wouldn't have the rest of the community to shelter some of the blow, or to give us a lift when we need it. Because the movement is so. In the UK, the trans community may be fighting for something else. In the US, same thing. In the Caribbean, something else. So why would we separate when the entire movement is all going towards equality? We just want equality. We just want access to basic human rights. We want access to comprehensive health care. We want access to marriage. We want access to adoption, or going to IVF and getting a biological child by whichever partner or both. So I think leaving the rest of the LGB is a big disaster. Hell no.
Thank you for finishing us with that hell no, because I'm totally with you as well. Just conscious that we're sort of coming up to the top of the hour. That time has just flown by. I feel we could be talking for a lot longer. What I'd like us to do is to go to each of the panelists now, just to say, for those people that have been viewing and watching, what's your one piece of advice for those trans and non-binary people or allies who've been watching today? Who would like to go first?
I'll step in. I think it follows on from what we've just been saying. We will only achieve true equality if we all work together, and whether that be for race, whether that be for the gender pay gap, whether that be for the LGBTQ plus community, we'll only get there together. So my piece of advice is educate yourself, educate others, ask those questions where it is safe to do so, to be able to educate yourself, to have those conversations and really speak out on behalf of any injustices you see, to make the world a better place, really.
Thank you, Preston.
I'd say for the trans and non-binary people, visibility matters. The more visible we are, living our lives authentically, the more we make ourselves unothered. We're not othered by people. And for the allies watching, I would say, get to know the trans and non-binary people around you. We are everywhere. There's more of us than you think, and there's many people who don't feel able to come out. Help them to come out, help them to be authentic, and don't be a performative ally to the point that's made earlier.
Thank you, Emily. Raven, what's your one piece of advice for people watching this today?
I just think that everyone needs to be a little more open and sincere, a little more understanding to things that you don't have a lot of knowledge about. If it scares you, face it. That's the best way to confront things. If you don't understand, seek knowledge. And again, some allies may ask questions that may offend Preston, but may not offend me. Every trans person is not the same. So don't paint us all with one brush. Just if you say something offensive and I notify you that it's offensive, say sorry and move on. Let's work to have a more genuine approach to being allies. And for trans and non-binary persons, the struggle will continue. Even if you think you come to your final form, there's still going to be struggles. There's still going to be challenges that you need to face head on and work through them. Being transgender does not happen overnight. It is a process. It is a continuous journey. And I think that we as community members, we as trans activists, we as trans allies need to have a more openness to everything that each other is going to be going through.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Brandon.
To sound very cliche, for the trans and non-binary folks watching, you're not alone. To echo what everyone else has said, there are plenty of us around. It's scary, but you can tackle it with others around you supporting you. And if you're an ally, be one of those people that is there to support your trans and non-binary friends. And yeah, we're all in this together, to be incredibly cliche.
We're all in this together for human rights and inclusion. So thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you for being so open and for sharing and for answering all my questions and for also answering some of those on the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. But my one piece of advice is just share one thing you've taken away today with somebody you would normally have this conversation with. Because it's amazing where those conversations to go, especially as we're in Transgender Awareness Week. And on Friday, just take some time out and reflect for those people and remember all of those trans and non-binary people who've died or who have committed suicide on Transgender Day of Remembrance. It's a very poignant day for us. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that's been really good for you. And I'll pass now back to Chloe.
I have to say a massive thank you to all of you again, Preston, Emily, Brandon, Raven and Emma. It's been such a wonderful discussion to be able to be a part of and to listen to. I think we're currently at about 35 comments in the chat box in a minute of so many other people sharing how much they've really enjoyed it, and Facebook has said the absolute same. So a few more thank yous. Thank yous to our partners, so Willis Tower Watson, RS Components, Global Butterflies, Butterfly Barbados, for all of the help with the panelists, and Busy Being Black, one of our community partners as well, in helping support and facilitate this session. I hate that it's over. But please do remember you can find all of our panelists on the platform, so please do continue to engage. I see lots of people asking questions or saying that they're going to follow up. Remember that your allyship is not performative, so please do make sure you continue to do that, continue to engage in those conversations. We are back on Monday for another session. The future is fluid and in colour from 4 p.m. So please do make sure that you check back in. If you haven't registered for that session, there's time to now. Go to the website www.mygwork.com. Have a lovely evening, everyone. It's been so wonderful to have you here with us. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.